Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Graduate School of Architecture tonight for the third in what is our GSA Talk series. So welcome, everyone. For those of us who don't know the GSA, we are the Graduate School of Architecture based at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. We are the only postgraduate school of architecture in South Africa. And for our English and RIBA audience, the GSA was set up 10 years ago by Professor Leslie Loco, with whom I'm sure you are all familiar. She was the most recent last year recipient of the Royal Gold Medal from the RIBA. Leslie set up the school really at a very critical juncture in education in South Africa, but also in architectural education in South Africa, which was 10 years ago around this time. We had the Fees Must Fall movement, which is a student protest movement around the cost of education in a democratic South Africa. And also, perhaps more widely known to an international audience, the Roads Must Fall movement, which was really around education and pedagogy, and the need to really transform the curriculum, particularly in a decolonial context like South Africa. So there were very serious and live questions around what an architectural education needed to be, and what an African architectural education needed to be, and what an African architectural education needed to be in contemporary South Africa. So the school was set up explicitly around a transformative pedagogy model, which was really seeking, in the way that the school was structured, in the thinking, in the curriculum, to really arrive at a new model for education, architectural education in South Africa. It was very generous of the University of Johannesburg to host that school and really support it and give Leslie a free rein as to how that model would operate and what it would look like. And I think it's safe to say that 10 years on from that foundational moment, the school has had a real impact in South Africa, but I think also internationally around these questions. I think it has in some ways presaged many of the wider debates that I know are now happening in the United Kingdom around architecture, the role of institutes, the role of the profession, the future of the profession. And a key part of those debates here for us at the GSA has been talking to other parts of the world around what they're experiencing. And so a large part of our mandate and our mode of operation has been the public events program. We have had a number of people come and speak at the school. We always invite people to come in for reviews. And we also go out there and speak to other schools and people from around the world. And I think those exchanges and those discussions are a really important part of changing the landscape of architecture. And I think we are all united in understanding that the landscape does need to change. And so it gives us great pleasure to host these talks. And the GSA Talks series in particular is really around us in dialogue with other institutions. So this is the third of the series this year. The first one was with Keller Easterling. And so we're trying to build a stream of talks around leading academics in the Americas. And the second talk this year was Lily Jenks from the Jenks Foundation. That was an in-person talk at the GSA. And it's part of a two-part discussion with the Jenks Foundation, really about the canon and what is non-canonical. And the second part of that will be a symposium and exhibition in Johannesburg in June around the chronograms and the Jenks Foundation. And what you're participating in tonight is the third strand of that, which is the start of a bigger discussion with the RIBA around what is a large membership actually that the RIBA holds in Africa. How does the RIBA see Africa in the diaspora, and how can we begin an engagement? And I think it stems from many discussions, but also from the AZA, which is our national architectural conference that we hosted at the University of Johannesburg last year. So it gives us great pleasure to start this collaboration with RIBA Africa, and we are probably planning to have another 2 or 3 events with RIBA Africa this year. We are trying to do them online so that we can have a dialogue between the two constituencies, and really gives us pleasure, and we're really excited to be doing this. I will, at this point, hand over to Nenpin Dimka, who some of you from the UK might be familiar with. I'm going to introduce him to our South African audience. Nenpin is a UK chartered and Nigerian registered architect and a thought leader in advancing architectural agency in an era of AI-driven transformation. He champions the responsible use of AI to expand design intelligence and drive systemic change across architectural education and practice. He also serves as the co-chair of the Expert Advisory Group on AI and the chair of the Africa Chapter Steering Committee at the Royal Institute of British Architects. He previously sat on the Royal Institute of British Architects Council and its board committee for education and professional development. So he is quite pivotal in the UK educational scene and in how the UK equivalent of SACAP here in South Africa thinks about and understands architecture and the profession and education. And he will be sort of leading the charge, I suppose, in RIBA's turning its attention towards its African membership and the conversations that are possible there. Welcome to the GSA, Nenpin. It's such a joy to be able to welcome you here.
Thank you very much, Ghislaine. Quite ecstatic to be here. So the pleasure and the joy is really all mine. And on behalf of the Africa Steering Committee, I'm very delighted to extend our joy and pleasure. As the Royal Institute of British Architects, we are in the process of setting up what is going to culminate into a chapter. We're currently a group by governance terms. And it's a very great pleasure to be with the University of Johannesburg and the GSA, who have been very, very supportive of our journey thus far. And it was also, again, a delight to be at the AZA last year and experience some of the fantastic things that the institution has been doing around architecture over the decade it has been running at the GSA and beyond on its undergrad programs. As part of setting up this chapter and fostering some of the conversations that Ghislaine has highlighted around African architectural education and African architecture, we have set up a series, and this would be the first of that, one that celebrates what is architecture, but has also a keen focus on providing a celebratory platform for architects, African architects, as well as African architecture on the continent in all of its nuance. We're very, very, very mindful that it is quite a vast region. And as such, we've been moving towards a very collaborative approach. And the GSA, again, has been, and the University of Johannesburg has been very, very instrumental in us fostering that objective. So similar to what Ghislaine has said, there will be further collaborations, which we are very, very happy about. So please, we'll be expecting you to tune in and sort of watch this space. And to kick off our series today, we will be having Andy. Andy is an architect and a principal at Grimshaw, a UK practice where he leads a UK and an international practice, which I'm sure most people in the room might be familiar with. Where he leads transport. Andy leads transport, culture, and master planning projects in the UK and internationally. He's accredited by the International Living Future Institute, reflecting Andy's passion for creating buildings and places that balance the built environment with natural ecosystems and advocating for regenerative design at all scales. Andy's approach to design, which draws on the beauty of efficiency of nature to deliver transformational change, is exemplified in his long-term collaboration with Eden Project, which is what his lecture today will be centered on. This includes new destinations in Morecambe and Qingdao, in China, and his recent award-winning work at Shenzhen Airport East International Transport Hub in China. Using advanced digital tools and computational workflows, Andy's work also focuses on optimizing the design process and building performance. In 2025, he shared his approach at the Shape to Fabricate AEC conference, presenting digital strategies for large-scale infrastructure design. Andy also leads Grimshaw's industry partnership with the University of Lancaster in the UK, exploring how designers can make better use of AI to support low-carbon building design. As our first guest speaker for RIBA Africa, Andy will share insights into Grimshaw and Eden Project collaboration as Eden Project Cornwall celebrates its 25th birthday. Exploring the integration of architecture, the natural world, and people-led experiences, and education that is realizing a more regenerative future. So I would now pass on to Andy.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation from RIBA Africa and the GSA to present. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to share our work with you all. And I thought the point that Jilan made at the beginning around kind of making global connections is something that I sort of really value and have been lucky enough in my career to kind of work all over the world. And I think in terms of, you know, the challenges that we face, making those global connections and working with one another is more relevant than ever. So I'm delighted to be able to make this connection with you all and with the audience. I don't know how familiar everyone is with Grimshaw or Eden Project, but I'm obviously going to be covering that in the presentation, which is called Learning from Nature. I suppose this is one of the strands that informs our work as a studio, but it's one that's really underpinned a lot of the work that I've done over the last 14 years. So I'll talk a little bit about the office and about the practice, about our history, but the presentation is really a story of 3 projects. And it's at a very interesting point in time where, like Nenpin said, Eden Project in Cornwall is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And there's lots of celebrations happening to in aid of that. There's a Eden Qingdao opened just last year, which is a project that I've been involved with for a long time. And Eden Project Morecambe is currently on the drawing board and is due to start on site this year. So this is the story of kind of 3 Eden projects at various stages of their development. The Grimshaw are a global studio started by Sir Nicholas Grimshaw in 1980. We operate all over the world. We've got 8 studios. We've been in operation 46 years now. It was founded in 1980. Nick was awarded the gold medal in 2019, which was a big celebration for him and for the office. You know, in recognition to his outstanding contribution to the built environment. Nick was an amazing guy, and I think he's left an amazing legacy, both with his buildings, but also with the Grimshaw Foundation that was set up in 2022, which engages young people from an early age and kind of shows them the possibilities and the sorts of careers that exist within the built environment. That's Nick with Bucky Fuller, by the way, and in front of Nick's first project, which is a service student tower in London. Nick sadly died last year. But he was extremely, delighted to win the gold medal. He started very much and became well recognized for industrial buildings. So the Herman Miller factory, which is up here on the top left, is a one of Nick's well-known first projects, which actually is very interesting being at the practice at this moment in time, because we recently refurbished this building and turned it into a school of art and design for the University of Bath. So we're at that point in time where we're revisiting some of Nick's original projects and repurposing them and understanding some of those fundamental principles about buildings in terms of their flexibility and providing longevity in the architecture and how that's been done. And it's a very important theme, as well as the kind of things I'll touch on in terms of the natural inspiration. You know, buildings made to last and being able to adapt over the course of their lifetime. Nick always used to say that his most significant project was the international terminal at Waterloo, because it really made Grimshaw a very well-known name, and it was a huge project win. And it was kind of the springboard for a lot of the projects that then happened subsequently, especially around the millennium, which the Eden project was one of those millennium projects. There was a Millennium Commission set up to deliver projects that would celebrate, you know, the turn of the century or the turn of the millennium. And there were other ones that were involved with. I wasn't involved in the top 3 projects here. They were before my time, but the bottom 3 are projects that I've been involved with, ranging from kind of workplace through to aviation and transportation, and then my kind of long-term relationship with the Eden project and Qingdao that opened last year. And it's certainly been a privilege of mine to well, follow in the footsteps of what I consider to be a giant in terms of Nick Grimshaw, but to kind of continue that legacy and deliver the architecture that he, you know, the quality of architecture that he established. So I've been at Grimshaw 14 years. I'm really passionate. I've always been very passionate about sustainability. At Grimshaw, I was really happy that we made commitments towards net zero and to regenerative design. And I recently kind of qualified as an accredited professional with ILFI under their Living Futures program, which is part of our kind of drive towards upskilling in terms of how we deliver regenerative projects at the office. At Grimshaw, we have a kind of motto, which is ingenuity through beauty, and achieving ingenuity through beauty is a theme that's underpinned kind of my approach to design for quite some time. And I think that looking at kind of local ecology and how that can inform our designs, it's really at the core of regenerative thinking. And I think that's kind of represented in it. There's a sort of selection of images here that are from various things that I've worked on recently. You know, from the protected canopy in Shenzhen on the top left here, which was inspired by the kind of local mangrove ecosystems, and connecting buildings to their context, like the bottom image on the right, which is Eden Morecambe, with the kind of shell-inspired forms, and down to a kind of one of my first projects on the bottom left, which was simply a design for a bike stand, which kind of was unintentionally drew on kind of natural inspiration, but you can see the kind of natural geometries in order to solve a problem around the available space to kind of stack the bikes. There's an underlying theme as well in this presentation, which is about the power of partnerships and what can be achieved through kind of long-term collaboration. We've been working with Eden Project now for 30 years. It was when Tim Smith, Sir Tim Smith, had the original idea to do something in Cornwall, kind of something heroic to celebrate the millennium. And there's a famous quote from Tim about asking Grimshaw to design the 8th wonder of the world, and he got it. Eden Project was established in the 90s and set up as an educational charity. It's a social enterprise, and it's a visitor attraction. Tim had previously operated another destination in Cornwall called the Lost Gardens of Halligan, which, if any of you, I don't know if anyone's visited, but it's also a wonderful botanical garden. The Eden Project, I think, as a sort of typology, it draws on a tradition that goes back centuries, actually. The idea of kind of curated botanical gardens and glass houses, and this idea, I suppose, of taking people to other worlds, which culminated in the industrial age with the Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace of 18 51, which is the images that you see on screen here. So the Eden Project really, I think, draws on this history and this interest that we've had in these really extraordinary environments, and taking people to natural worlds may be different to what they're immediately able to access. The Eden Project, it's an educational charity, and their mission is to inspire positive action for the planet. Their aim is to connect people to nature, and they do that slightly differently through each destination, which I'll talk on. They really do this through a combination of things. They've got their visitor destinations. They also have conservation projects, and programs are very important. So, activities and educational programs are kind of key to Eden Project's activity. This is a picture of the first one, which I'm sure any architects will be familiar with. It's often one that when people come to interview at Grimshaw, everyone seems to know this one, and it's inspired quite a few student projects in its time, I'm sure. And obviously the most famous buildings here are the biomes, the tropical biome and the Mediterranean biome. But we there's this campus of buildings here which we delivered, which I think each of them has a very interesting sustainability story. And this campus of buildings is one that we draw inspiration from as a practice all the time. We refer back to these buildings quite often to inform what we're doing now. So they're more relevant than ever, really. The story of transformation is really important. And again, kind of in terms of regenerative approaches, the Eden Project, when the site selection is happening, they very much think about the condition of the existing site. This is the China clay pit in Cornwall before the Eden Project was built. And this story of positive transformation and restoring landscapes that have been scarred by human activity is very much part of the early stages of Eden projects in the site identification stages. The other thing, I suppose, architects quite often focus on the infrastructure and the built elements. But what Eden Project have done really successfully is to use their assets and their campus of buildings to bring forward all kinds of programs. And it's been a huge benefit socially and economically in Cornwall. And this is very key in the considerations around when we talk about sustainability beyond energy and the types of things architects traditionally think about in terms of sustainable design, also around the economic and social sustainability. It's very important to Eden Project's approach to delivering projects. I've always really liked the fact that it's called a project, by the way, because the first phase didn't contain everything. It's developed over the last 30 years, Eden Project in Cornwall, up to around, I think a few years ago, they installed their geothermal energy centre. So, even 25 years, they've still been adding to it. And there's a campus of buildings that we've worked on over the course of those years. One of the really nice things about working on this type of project is that the buildings themselves are educational tools. So if you go to Eden Project, you'll quite often see tour guides taking people around and talking about the Fibonacci sequence and the phyllotaxis pattern in the roof of the core building, which is the bottom set of images here. And obviously the biomes in terms of their honeycomb structure. And I think this is as an architect, it's a really great thing to think about your building as a learning tool for people who are visiting the building. And they're part of the visitor experience and connecting people to the natural world through the architecture. I've just got a series of images here as to illustrate this point around the evolution of the site. So this is in year 2000 when the biomes were being constructed, and it's a very popular photo that I use quite a bit. This one, the project had 500,000 visitors before it even opened. It was called the Big Dig, and you could just go and look through the window and see this huge construction project happening. This is a picture of the visitor centre, and I'm just going to pick up on some of the key, sustainability and sustainable design principles really were at the core of the design of these buildings. So this is the entrance into the visitor centre as you enter Eden Project, and the wall on the right is a rammed earth wall, and the rammed earth was clay that was collected during the construction that they put to one side, and then they used that to build the wall. This is becoming more and more common, but at the time in the UK that was pretty innovative. And obviously the biomes with their air inflated cushions, so these are about 11 meters long, you can span a long way really efficiently. This was probably the first large scale use of the material in an installation like this, and this is really a masterclass in material efficiency. And there's Andrew Wally, who's the chairman at Grimshaw, tells me that the weight of the enclosure is lighter than the weight of the air inside the biomes. The biomes themselves are double layer grid shells, so this is really something that we focus on a lot at Grimshaw, which is material efficiency and how to drive down the amount of material that you're using. The grid shell's a steel frame in this case, but it's able to be made very, very sort of elegant and material efficient by doing a double layer structure. Actually, it's very, it's kind of, well, I don't think there are many other examples of something like this in the world, such a large span structure with such a lightweight enclosure. I suppose the other thing about it is that Eden Project in Cornwall is very much designed for plants rather than people. Sometimes it can get quite uncomfortable in there in terms of the temperature, and there are refuges in there, but it does provide the optimal growing conditions for the plants inside. Slightly different to perhaps how we sometimes approach the design of buildings for human comfort. We're also thinking about plant comfort and about what will allow the plants to thrive. This is a picture of the foundation building, which is the operations building, which I've visited many times because it's the building where the people who work at Eden Project, this is their office. It's a really nice building, and it's got you can see the glulam structure. So it's quite simple, but the principle behind this was reducing the amount of concrete in the foundation. So we've got concrete pad foundations and then an entirely timber frame structure, and also starting to design out things like, it was PVC free, the building. So starting to think about toxic materials that are very commonly used in buildings and thinking about alternatives and how to avoid the use of those. And this was the final building that was delivered by us in Cornwall, which is the core building. It's an educational building. And the roof form, and I'll show an internal photograph in a second, is the one that's got the, it's derived from the Fibonacci sequence and the spiral phenotaxis pattern, which you see in things like the sunflower heads. But of course, things like the detail on the right, which is one of my favorites, which is around celebrating, this was the point where, recognizing that water is a precious resource and capturing it and reusing it and celebrating that fact with the big hopper that comes down from the roof into the gutter that comes down from the roof into the hopper is one that we refer to quite a lot in our other projects. And here you can see the interior of the roof with the glulam, curved glulam structure. And again, this is when, if you're in this space, there's obviously the huge Infinity Blue sculpture, which is it's a giant cyanobacteria, which is a kind of interactive sculpture. But so that's a sort of science immersive installation, but also people are told the story of the buildings and the use of timber and the patterns and so on. One of the things that we've realized with buildings like this and has informed our subsequent designs for Qingdao and Morecambe is this building is now through its second or third generation of exhibition design or experiential elements. So designing these types of buildings really flexibly so the programming can change, because of course destinations like Eden, they need to reprogram from time to time to encourage repeat visits. So that's been a key principle on some of the other projects that we've worked on. So like I said, I think each of these buildings in the original campus tells us something, and it gives us something to learn about kind of different approaches to sustainable design. And like I said, we use these as a reference in the office quite often, whether it be the kind of low embodied energy, material efficiency, and driving down material use, low operational carbon and how we can achieve it. And actually one of the other elements within the core building was around responsible sourcing of the copper roof. At the time, there wasn't the copper industry. Eden Project saw this as an opportunity to engage the copper industry and try and find ways to encourage responsible sourcing. I became involved around this time with Eden Project, so around 2015-16, when Eden sort of identified that to expand and broaden their reach, they would like to establish a global network. And the interesting thing about this is, and the map on the left kind of shows the various projects. You'll see that there's a notable absence of projects in Africa for no particular reason. It would be wonderful to do one there. So I'll keep my fingers crossed that something comes out of this presentation. The interesting thing about the destinations, I suppose, is that they're each different. It's not a cookie cutter visitor destination like, for example, a Disneyland. Eden Project, in the feasibility stage, and we work with them very closely, develop the theme of each destination based on delivering their core mission, which is to connect people to the natural world, but doing so with a slightly different theme. So the theme of the original Eden Project was plants. On Qingdao, which I'll talk about in a second, the theme emerged as water. And at Morecambe, there's a very lovely theme, which is around rhythms and human and natural rhythms, and the balance and imbalance of those rhythms, and connecting people to rhythms. So this is a wonderful opportunity, but also can be very challenging at the beginning when you're designing a venue, but you're not quite sure exactly what the theming is and what the functionality of the building might be. But I think this idea that this place-based approach, again, it underpins everything that when we talk about regenerative design thinking, this is a very important aspect of it. So these are the three projects that I'm talking about. So Eden Project on the left, and then the two projects on the right, Eden Project Qingdao, and which has just been completed last year, or it was opened last year, and the one that we currently have on the drawing board, Eden Project Morecambe. Of course, there are a series of other ones that we have explored and developed, which are still on the drawing board, and for whatever reason, haven't made it past the kind of early stages, the feasibility stages. They're pretty delicate projects to bring forward, actually. And so there've been various reasons why we haven't been able to bring them any further. But we've, I suppose, since 2016, I think we've done about maybe 10 feasibility studies, and with 3 of those coming forward. But very interesting in terms of the collection of projects here. You can see that they're all very different in their kind of architectural response based on the place. We did a very interesting one in Jizhou, which is in China, which is the top middle one, and that was all driven by consideration around it was in a seismic zone and how we might respond to earthquake conditions with the enclosure. So Eden Project Qingdao, we started that in about 2015, working with Eden Project, and this was the first. I think this was the first Eden International project as well. Qingdao well, people might know it. There's a famous beer called Qingdao, which is a big export from China, and this is where it comes from. Qingdao is sort of midpoint between Beijing and Shanghai in China's eastern Shandong province. It's a city of parks, beaches bordering the Yellow Sea, and the site, which is highlighted in yellow on the right hand side. There's a developer called Jin Mao. They're quite famous in China, very big development company. They were developing a master plan on the whole peninsula, and the project came around from sort of planning restrictions around the site dictating that the yellow area should be an ecologically focused destination, and that's where Eden Project sort of became involved. Again, the site was scarred by human activity. It had been a few things over the history of time. Recently, a kind of shrimp farm, but you can kind of see here there's a load of it was just derelict with lots of kind of rubbish on it. And so there was a big opportunity here to bring this back to life and return it to kind of public access. The vision was there was some very quick development on one of the site visits, where actually I'm going to give credit to Jolyon Brewis here, who's one of the partners at Grimshaw, and he was very instrumental in getting Eden Project International off the ground and bringing in some of these first opportunities. Some of the themes for the Eden projects emerge really quickly, and some of them take much longer to gestate at the early stage. With Eden Qingdao, I think the theme of water came about quite quickly, and it's easy to understand why. I think because of the site and its location, and the theme of water in sort of Chinese culture, is a symbol of it's quite a profound symbol in Chinese culture, and thinking about the kind of global issues around water and sort of starting to recognize that as a precious resource, it became a fairly obvious theme to develop for the destination. So there was this idea at the beginning of the first version of the master plan was this idea of the hand, and the idea there was kind of maximizing the perimeter of the water surface area to connect people to the water, and the idea with the middle photo here of Sir Tim Smith kind of holding out his hand, with the biome being the jewel being offered to the city of Qingdao. We, of course, then there's a kind of little bit of our kind of process here, which is lots of optioneering then ensued, where we were exploring different master plans. And like I said, what's happening in those early stages is that the functional, it's not like receiving a brief for an office building where you know exactly what the spaces might be. We're developing the functional brief and the theming and the venue design all at the same time, and there becomes a point in the feasibility study, I think, where these things start to come together, and you can there becomes a front runner in some of the options that you're exploring. In this case, it was about the zoning, the hand kind of option best fitted in with the zoning strategy for the site, which is illustrated here. And actually the master plan did subsequently change quite a bit over the course of kind of concept design and then schematic design, and we also did preliminary design. The overall site layout changed, but the zoning stayed the same. So the three zones of kind of water quality, water abundance, and water extremes, and each of the landscape and the buildings within those zones kind of responds to those key themes. It's a very big site. It's about 93 hectares overall, with the core area, which is on the bottom right, with the biome and the gateway pavilion in it, is about 30 hectares. The buildings, I remember the brief for the biome. I think it was something like they wanted it to be 25% bigger than the rainforest biome in Cornwall. So it's quite a ginormous building. It's 19,500 square meters footprint, I think. This is some of the kind of inspiration for the building. Unlike in Cornwall, where the biomes are sheltered by the clay pit, they're kind of sunken quite deep. Qingdao's very exposed. So this idea of this huge structure, the idea of this being kind of an aerodynamic form that was orientated in relation to the prevailing wind, in order to minimize or to optimize the structure, became a kind of key principle of the design. So it's orientated north, west, southeast on that main prevailing wind direction. And we worked with Schleich Bergermann Partners, who are a German structural engineering company specializing in kind of long span lightweight structures on this. We worked with them quite a lot. And the idea of a kind of this is an interior view. Two things. we came up with the idea of a kind of central arch structure, which is a really hard-working utility spine. It's got services in it, in order to make the side grid shells very light and transparent. And also, unlike at Cornwall, where you've got the quarry walls to kind of take people up and get elevated views, Qingdao is completely flat. So there's an internal structure which we designed called the source to allow people to go to an elevated vantage point and look from the top view here. And these are just some images of the source, which developed. We worked with a company, an experiential design company called Event. These internal structures are quite important in terms of the environmental performance of the building, because in a big span structure like this, you also want to do some heat recovery, air circulation. So if you can introduce some structures inside, it allows you to do that, and as well as providing, you know, climate controlled conditions for immersive experiences and things. So it's building within a building. The pavilions were quite different. The Gateway Pavilion, originally there were 3 of these pavilions, and then for cost reasons we ended up reducing it to 1, to just the Gateway. Very much inspired by the core building in Cornwall that I showed earlier, but thinking about them as very flexible. We kind of, for the first versions of these were like kits of parts, that the pavilions could be similar but slightly varied from one another. We really wanted to do these in timber, but it just wasn't at the time, sort of going back 10 years now, it was really hard to convince QEP, who were the client at this point. Eden Project was the client at the beginning, and then we were appointed by QEP, who were a subsidiary of Jinmao. We couldn't convince them to do timber. It was too innovative for them. I think it's something that in the UK we're now fairly familiar with, some quite often, but we couldn't convince the Chinese client to go with timber, so we ended up with a steel structure. But it was the concept remained the same, which was a kind of fairly modular, flexible kind of set of exhibition halls, and again, drawing on some inspiration from the project in Cornwall, was the idea around, you know, celebrating this the rainwater harvesting and capture, where the structural footings come down. So the project was constructed during the COVID epidemic, and it paused on site for a while. These are some of the site photos, and you can see the kind of the buildings coming to life here. The photo on the right gives you a little bit of sense of scale. That's one of these EFB cushions. I think they're about 9 by 9, the triangles, with some of the mock-ups that were done on site. We were in a partnership, a consortium with a Chinese company called CCDI. So we developed the design to the sort of preliminary design level, and then they sort of continued the construction documentation and carried out work on site, with us doing kind of you know, fairly periodic visits. And these are some photos from the opening. You can see on the top left how much the landscape changed from the site originally, and it's actually looking pretty lush there. That was taken in the middle of last year. And some of the landscape works that we weren't involved with, like on the bottom right, are really successful. Others not so much. Some of the things that have emerged, you know, are a little bit outside of our control, that perhaps aren't as good. But overall, it's been it looks really good. And this is looking from towards the Gateway Pavilion, looking back to the development I mentioned earlier, which was the residential and kind of commercial development that's up to the north. So it's actually in quite close proximity to quite a large kind of urban population. And then these are really hot off the press, these images. That you can still see the stamp mark on the bottom right. We had a professional photographer visit in December, and it looks quite cold and a bit stark, but the photos themselves kind of show the architecture and the buildings quite nicely, I think. But we're going to go back in probably in summertime again, when the landscape's looking a bit more lush. Here you're looking into the Gateway Pavilion. And this is kind of the welcome building, where people do their ticketing and sort of get introduced to the kind of theme of water. Although we couldn't do timber, the curvature of the roof in the pavilions is still really important in terms of material efficiency. You know, we're doing quite long span structures here still, and we're able to do that with, you know, column-free spaces because of the double curvature of the roof. And also quite nice things like the north-facing roof lights, which obviously allow us to control the sunlight coming into these exhibition spaces. And the biome itself is pretty spectacular. Like I said, I think it's 210 meters long, I think, by 140 meters wide. There's an adrenaline walkway which you can go up, which is the two forks that come up at the front and then onto the top, a bit like you can do at the Millennium Dome. People can go up there, and it's part of the visitor destination. And here's a shot inside. You can see that the sort of landscape actually coming to life. And this idea of a kind of multi-level experience, like I said, being able to take people up to the upper walkways, up through the source. And the photo on the left, I think, shows really well how this central arch structure then allows a kind of really, you know, transparent, simple set of grid shells that fit within that. And you can kind of just about see there's a bit of milkiness in the ETFE cushions, but you can see out towards Qingdao, which is the city centre in the distance from the top of the source. And then there are nice things like the experiential elevator is what takes you up from the ground up to the top of the source in the biome. And there's also a restaurant in there at the southern end, which is the bottom right photo here, where you can look out into the storm forest biome. I'm going to finish off with the work that we've been doing on Eden Project in Morecambe. And like I said, this one's on the drawing board at the moment. And the reason why I wanted to present it is because it's one that's really close to my heart. It's close to where I grew up. Again, it's had a fairly long gestation period. I've been working on this since about 2017, which kind of illustrates how long some of these projects take to sort of deliver. Again, the site selection, there was a site selection done. The opportunity actually came in through the University of Lancaster. There was a guy there called Andrew Atherton who had an idea that it would be great to do an Eden project in the northwest somewhere. And after kind of looking at a range of sites, Morecambe was chosen. It's in the northwest of England. You can see Eden Project down at the bottom left of the map. If any of you aren't familiar with the kind of geography. So it's, I don't know, it's a few hundred miles away up to the north. It's really an area of outstanding natural beauty and actually ecologically pretty significant, Morecambe Bay. And unlike Cornwall, which is fairly remote, there's actually a large catchment area in Morecambe. You've got the Lake District, which is obviously a very popular place to visit, and places like Manchester and Liverpool are very close by. And there's great views towards the Lake District, which is the image on the bottom right. In its heyday, Morecambe was a really popular seaside resort, and people used to be prescribed going to Morecambe by their doctor for health and well-being purposes. And this was one of the first themes that emerged for the project, was this idea around blue health and coastal well-being, which eventually evolved into this theme of rhythms. Another reason why this is a project that's particularly close to my heart is that my granddad worked on the project that's on the bottom right image, which was a swimming complex, which was there in the 70s. So it's been various things over the years. There was a Lido on the bottom left in the early 1900s, and then in the 70s the swimming pool. But now the site is effectively derelict. There's a sort of fair that goes on there from time to time. There are some really significant historical buildings close by. You've got on the north, the white building is called the Midland Hotel, and that's a very famous Art Deco building. And the Winter Gardens Theatre, which is a Victorian theatre, which is the red brick building on the left. So our buildings will sit on this site and form, I think, quite a nice create a kind of trio of buildings. I think so. Eden Project and our experiential designers, a company called Artifact, who are based in New Zealand, I think they've come up with a really wonderful theme here, which is around rhythms. Slightly different to the whole thing around kind of plants and water, around human rhythms and circadian rhythms. And the reason why this came about was because of this kind of seasonal and lunar rhythms and the tidal rhythms that are so kind of visible in Morecambe. And so they use this as the inspiration to drive the theming. And I think this idea around connecting people to nature's rhythms and to cultural rhythms, and it brings things in like dance and music, is a really nice story. We developed a kind of set of kind of guiding principles for this project very early on, which have remained kind of a basis of our design development. The designs changed quite a bit over the course of the design period, but this idea of a kind of, you know, a landmark piece of architecture in harmony with the rhythms of Morecambe. Again, design that's inspired by nature. So we're looking at the local ecology, and this is where the kind of the shell, the mussel shell inspiration emerged from. Like I was saying, the buildings in Cornwall, the idea that the buildings themselves tell a story and play a role in the visitor experience. And this is a project which has got some really ambitious sustainability objectives. Again, at the early stage, we looked at a range of kind of options for how we might approach the architectural proposal. At this stage, we didn't really know what was going to be inside. But this idea on the kind of colony of shells was an obvious then at that time the programming was comprised of this kind of series of spaces. So we thought these kind of multiple medium span structures would be a nice way to accommodate the programming that was being developed. And this emerged into this whole study into kind of shell forms and the mussel shells. And there's a nice image on the top right here, which is the kind of the idea of the buildings and the landscape and the kind of the flow of the kind of the wind and how that you have shell forms and then the subtraction of the forms in the landscape, and that's become actually part of the design. But this idea of the kind of colony of shells has stayed a really strong feature of the design, and it's allowed the design to change over the course of the process, but without us changing the concept for the building. This project has also created new partnerships for us. So as part of the project, we became affiliated with the University of Lancaster, and there's a guy there called Des Fagan who is doing lots of research into AI, and we did a research project with him. Actually, we've been continuing to do it over the course of a couple of years around how we can use artificial intelligence to help us in the design of low carbon buildings. And we looked at lots of different topics. This is just one of the ones where, looking at the shell forms and mapping them. And Des has translated that into kind of a sort of scripting to be able to test the optimal geometries of shell forms with different parameters. So it's leading to really kind of interesting kind of research topics in how we use nature to inspire and inform our buildings from a very sustainable and carbon focused perspective. Like I said, this idea of the kind of the colony of shells is really a key feature of the scheme, and that includes the buildings and the landscape. So we have this idea of the kind of you'll see me refer to some of the things: the realm of the sun, the metronome, and realm of the moon are what we call the three main enclosures. And then either side of that, you've got the gardens, the all seasons garden and the rhythms garden. And these things have kind of morphed and developed during the design stage, but this idea of the colony of shells has remained constant. Actually, it's really nicely come to life this is a sort of integrated plan showing the buildings and the landscape in one. And I think it's really working successfully in terms of those things talking to one another and having a very strong kind of relationship. And so it's a very, the buildings themselves reflect what's going on inside quite directly. You have a dark shell and a light shell. The realm of the sun is the one that we call the light shell in this model, and the one in the background, you see the very dark kind of mussel shell building is realm of the moon. And this is really working very closely with the experiential designers to make sure that the buildings, the shell and core of the building really optimally suits the experiences within inside, albeit that we want them to be able to flex over the course of their lives. Like I said, with the buildings in Cornwall, these will be reprogrammed over time. And so this is just a short video. Hopefully this brings this to life a little bit for people, of the building in its context. You can see the winter gardens on the left there. There's a fairly innovative and this is inside the realm of the moon, where you start to get a sense of this really immersive sort of landscape. And there's a terrace here, which is outside the restaurant, and trying to, you know, the views there are really spectacular out to Morecambe Bay. And you're seeing the flashing images there that are showing Eden also run a series of music events over the summer called the Eden Sessions. So there's a music venue of about 6,000 capacity for open air music events. So the experiences within the building, kind of, there's the realm of the sun, which is the naturally daylit, naturally ventilated immersive landscape space. Realm of the moon, which is a kind of black box space, and then connecting them is this building that we call the Metronome, which is the entry point where you do your ticketing, you get introduced to the theming, and then you can you go on from there to explore the venue. One of the really nice things about this project is that Eden project are obviously very enlightened in terms of a client group, and sustainability is very important to their brand identity. So I'm very pleased to be able to say that this is a project that is, you know, we are, it's a pilot project for a new standard that's been established, which is the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. Eden project have developed their own sustainability framework, which draws on many other ones that you'll be familiar with, like LEED and BREEAM, and well building. But I think it recognizes some of the themes that I spoke about earlier around social value and economic sustainability. But it's a very it's very fundamental to the way they're approaching the design, and obviously BREEAM is a given on a project like this. And that's resulted in a whole series of different strategies within the building and the landscape, such as on-site energy generation. But this is a building that, as well as the kind of the material efficiency theme, the idea of maximizing the use of timber has become a key aspect of the kind of structural design. So you can see here, this is the kind of the structural envelope strategy. And I suppose we decided fairly early on that it would be how can we improve upon the performance of the biome in Cornwall by reducing the embodied carbon? We thought we could do a timber structure. So I think this will be, there are some timber grid shells in the UK. There's the Fosters have one in Canary Wharf, which is like a cigar-shaped one. I think this one will be the longest span in two directions timber grid shell. And we wanted to obviously have this as a family. So we're also using timber structure in the Metronome and on the Realm of the Moon, but using it in a slightly different way. And it's a diagrid. And then over that, you've got the ETFE cushion, because on the Realm of the Sun, you need the natural daylight for the plants to grow. On the Metronome, we have a kind of coastal green roof, which plays a role in our kind of biodiversity story. And then on the Realm of the Moon, because it's a black box, we have a fully energy generating roof. So we're trying to harness use that to generate solar power. And then on the ground, on the facade of the Realm of the Moon, we've got kind of materials that reflect the coastal environment, stone gabions, and so on. This is just a little bit of a kind of, and I realize I'm going on slightly longer, but I'll be wrapping up shortly. Some of the analysis that we've been doing in order to, when we're exploring elements about optimizing and reducing the embodied carbon. So looking at things like, the aluminium framing on the ETFE cushions. We started off with square cushions, but then realized that if we do longer tubular cushions, we can reduce the framing by about 30%, and that's got a kind of embodied carbon impact. It's also got a kind of maintenance impact, because in a coastal environment like this, it'll probably be those gaskets and framing elements that will need replacing first. So over the whole life of the building, this is quite beneficial. And it has, and also obviously there's a cost benefit to reducing the amount of aluminium in the enclosure. So there's just a series of kind of step throughs, and these are very initial images as you're approaching the building, and you can see the biome on the left and the sort of energy generating roof of the realm of the moon on the right. This idea of the realm of the sun and realm of the moon being very apparent, and funneling people. Kind of, we talk about intuitive wayfinding quite a lot in kind of our transport projects, and I think the building's doing this by funneling people down. People will start to interact with the landscape at this point, but a very kind of intuitive entrance. And most of the accommodation is on the ground floor. The metronome here is in the central piece connecting those two shell forms. And once you go through the reception and into the main hall, you're then fairly freely able to circulate around the venue according to how it's not a very prescribed kind of go from A to B to C. People are encouraged to explore and make return journeys through out to the gardens, back in and around. And then there's an upper level, and a bit similar to Eden Qingdao in the realm of the sun, we have an upper level walkway with a large installation called the Elder Tree, which allows people to get up to a slightly elevated level so that they can kind of look around the landscape at a lower level. And then the restaurant is also obviously on the right hand side here in the orange, is also elevated, so you get really spectacular views out to the bay. So again, we've got lots more work to do on these interiors, but you know, this is the metronome is where you come in and you do all the practical stuff like dropping off your bag at the lockers, doing your ticketing, and then the idea is that when you go through the portal, you've done all of that stuff. You know, you've been to the toilet, and you're free to kind of be immersed in the world of Eden Project and being connected to those rhythms. And you can see here there's the kind of the portal into the, again, very initial images. You can kind of see the timber structure here, but then the portal through to Realm of the Sun on the left. And this, I've been taking this around various meetings with the headset. We have a VR headset that you can kind of go into this space and look around. It's really fantastic. You can see here the timber grid shell, which is it's a kind of two-layer, so you have a main element and then smaller element above and below, allowing us to do that very fairly long span in timber. And the Elder Tree is that that structure in the middle, which is a man-made. That will be a man-made structure with kind of accommodation inside. And the planting theme is all obviously curated to tell the story of the balance and the importance of understanding nature to create healthy rhythms, you know, healthy food, materials, and so on. And so there's a real story. I don't know if anyone's been to Eden Project in Cornwall, that they'll recognise this, because each plant has a kind of, there's a story behind the plant selection. But also this idea around within that landscape that are really fun, kind of interactive exhibits. It's quite an unusual kind of typology where you have this complete interaction of exhibits and landscape. It's obviously really fun, and it's meant, you know, it's meant to be a great day out. And then just going out to the external landscape, looking back towards the building, you know, the garden, we're working with a landscape architect called TEP. You know, they've been programming the gardens as well to tell this story of rhythms. The garden on the west is called the All Seasons Garden, which has it tells the story of landscape throughout this kind of seasons, you know, winter, summer, spring, and autumn. And then there's just a view here in the restaurant. The retail and dining experience is very important at Cornwall. Local sourcing, promoting local produce is very important. So this will be this is a very key thing that's happening at the moment, which is engaging with local supply chains to get those those things set up for when the building opens. But the main thing here is really this establishing this kind of panoramic view of the bay and being able to connect people outside. And then on the terrace that you saw earlier in the video, you know, the idea that there's a kind of fairly generous terrace there that allows performance. And the Morecambe has the most incredible sunset, so getting people out onto the terrace and being able to see the sunset is something that I think will be a real draw. And then finally, this is a view inside the shop. You can see there's a kind of similar motif for the internal spaces with this kind of timber diagrid in the ceiling, and exposing that to visitors. And again, the retail experience is very important. Brand kind of for the brand and storytelling, and sustainable sourcing and ethical products, and locally sourced products being kind of showcased within this. We're doing some really interesting work at the moment, testing and looking into more bio-based materials. So this is just some research on kind of shell-based materials. We're looking kind of shell-based aggregates, kind of shell-based bio, terrazzo, flooring, and so on. So this is a kind of, I think this is quite an interesting strand of investigation that will continue to develop. Now we finished stage 3 at the end of December, and we're just about to start on stage 4, and we're now into this stage of kind of engaging with suppliers and manufacturers and doing workshops to kind of test what we might do in terms of material innovations. So there's an interesting opportunity here to develop something fairly bespoke and unique, I think, responding to kind of the reducing the embodied carbon in the building. So we're at where are we now? 2026. Like I said, we finished stage 3 at the end of last year. We're just about to start stage 4. The contractor has been appointed and will start on site this year. And we're looking forward to hopefully the venue opening in end of 2028. So there's a couple of years to go on site yet, but we're very optimistic about the project. Like I said, it's been one that's been with us in the office for now, 2017, nearly 9 years. So yeah, we'll be absolutely having a huge celebration when hopefully it's completed and open.
Thank you, Andy, for a whirlwind tour through about 25 years of the Eden project. I'm surprised you managed to get it down to time. And as you were presenting, I was just struck by how much the debate has moved on in terms of the climate crisis, planetary considerations, green standards, etc., since the first Eden project. And just how in these kinds of projects, time is also a factor, the duration of the project, but also the growth of the garden that grows around it. So I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions around that. And I see a couple of hands are up already. So I'll just go to Nenpin first, and then Nenpin, maybe if you'd switch on your camera and perhaps ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jalan. Thank you, Andy, as well. That was a very engaging talk. I was particularly interested in your presentation and how it showed the workflow. I mean, despite using advanced tools such as AI, it still preserved, agency and, the hand-eye coordination sketches and all of that. So really interesting. But you also mentioned the hope of bringing the project to, Africa. So I thought I might catch you on that one, and especially as well because you've had the experience of successfully transferring it out of the UK to China. So in a South African post-industrial context, I'm just curious, what would, in your perspective, be the key principle that you would prioritize to ensure the project like that delivers, not just environmental restoration, but also meaningful economic and social impact?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer, I think. We do a lot to take the Chinese projects as an example. There's a fairly extensive feasibility stage where, depending on where the site is, and we've on Eden Qingdao, we had cultural advisors as well, to be able to make sure that we understand the site. This is obviously very important working internationally, and we've got lots of projects now where, especially in sensitive locations, I think it will be, you could go in there kind of prematurely without understanding the context and the site. And I think that whole feasibility stage, the purpose of that is we usually do a kind of cultural considerations report, which informs then the venue design and the theming. So running in parallel, it's like I said at the beginning, it's actually quite challenging at the beginning because you don't really know what you're designing. it's not like a school or a well-known typology. It's like, actually, in some cases, we just get a site, and it's like, well, what would be the most appropriate Eden project here? It's completely blank. So I think it would entirely depend upon, the geography, and it might be that a site has a particular history that's relevant to explore as a story. We've certainly looked at ones where in South America where there were mining operations, and I think there's a really interesting conversation to have about, to what degree do you tell the story of kind of the site, or is it around transforming into something else and all that kind of stuff? So I don't know, it's quite a hard, difficult question to answer, but I think what we do is we try and understand, and then, like I say, part of the project isn't going with a predetermined idea or a predetermined solution. The solution develops as a result of understanding the context and having lots of engagement with the Eden Project, the client team, and the people on the ground to understand what the most appropriate response will be. And that's why they're so interesting, because it's like I said at the beginning, it's not cookie cutter. Everyone's completely unique to its context and its social and economic kind of environment.
Right. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I think we've got another question from Kimesha. So Kimesha, perhaps you could put your camera on.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Ninpin. I was also kind of wondering how this could be applicable in a South African context, because when we think tourism, like one of the things we kind of worry about in South Africa is how do these large destination projects sort of genuinely benefit our local economies, especially our local communities where inequality is so obvious and so like a prevalent issue, and how does it remain accessible, meaningful, and beneficial to the local communities on the long term. But my question actually was just sort of leads onto the idea of how Eden Project uses nature to inspire and inform buildings to you take it to another level, and how to inspire positive actions for the planet and connect people to nature. So many of these design philosophies, such as phenomenology and biophilic design, it emphasizes that importance of engaging with the human senses and fostering that direct connection to nature in the movement of air, sound, smell, that unpredictability of nature. So in the Eden biomes, it seems like it's quite a controlled environment. So how do you design for that sense of immersion and spontaneity that you would get in nature?
Good question.
Sorry, my thesis was very similar.
I think there is I don't know, it'd be interesting to know who's been to Cornwall. I think we on Morecambe and on Qingdao, we do work quite closely with our experiential designers, and I think this is where we start to talk about things like, for example, there's a great moment in Cornwall where when you go through the visitor center, you don't see the biomes. You go through the visitor center and you can't see into the quarry. And there's a moment where you go through and there's this big reveal. And this is the element of surprise. It's this element of kind of, wow, I've just, it's a fantastic. And I think we use that device quite a lot, which is taking people through portals. So you have something like in the example would be in like as a comparison in Morecambe's much more, we don't have the capacity to do that thing where we do a big reveal because it's hidden in a clay pit. But what we do is we have these portals which are kind of programs. They put people in a particular thing, right? I'm going through the portal, and then suddenly you emerge from the portal, and there are then these moments of surprise where you actually emerge into the space, and it's like, wow. So I think we do play around with those kinds of devices, and the way that people kind of circulate, kind of taking them maybe not through the most obvious route, and then there are moments that they can pause and kind of this idea around prospect and refuge, I think they call it in kind of biophilic design, where suddenly things open up and then suddenly you're compressed again, and playing with this kind of thing, and moments where on the path there's because there is a sort of main route, but then of course there is it opens up to a space that you can go and explore. So there are moments of surprise where you can go and stop and and it's the interactive element of it, like the clock garden that I showed. So right, there's an interactive exhibit here, I'm going to spend time, and it's that kind of direct engagement that you kind of perhaps you weren't expecting to see something, and there's that kind of, I think that's where the experiential overlay is so important. These experiential elements that people interact with is another layer on top of, you've got the shell and core, the building is there to provide the framework. You've again got the landscape, and then on top of that in the Eden project, you've actually got the kind of the interactive exhibits, and that in itself is a really kind of dynamic set of elements that I think continues to kind of evolve. And one of the things actually, and I didn't talk about it very much in the talk, in Morecambe we have a space called the Tidal Theatre, and it does exactly what you're talking about, which is it's one space, but it's designed that over the course of the day, it's changing all the time. The idea is that it's never the same twice, which is done through a combination of kind of digital, immersive, lighting, digital screens, but also live performance. So you can go through it, go out to the rhythm gardens, and then come back through the same space, and it will be in a completely different mode. And I think that's a really interesting experience that I've not really seen before, that will hopefully be something that people really, and it will be surprised. You'll get back and say, oh, hang on a minute, it wasn't like this the first time around. So I think all of these things add up to a kind of fairly dynamic kind of environment for people.
That's great. Thank you. I must try and find a video on that.
Thanks. I think I'm looking at the questions now. I think I've got Leon, and then after Leon, we'll take a question from Emma, and then I'll just catch up. We've got a few questions in the chat, but I'll read them out to you. So Leon, perhaps you could ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, thanks everyone. Sorry, I'm in Rosebank somewhere. There's a bit of background noise. Apologies, but thank you for a wonderful lecture. I've always admired the work, and I wanted to ask about one of the earliest projects, which was actually the Waterloo Station. And, in my many years of teaching, I'm an old vintage Madala, and I always thought that roof was one of the most intelligent structures I've ever seen, because literally the one side allows the light to come in, which is the cooler side, but also allows air to escape through it and allows it to breathe. And then the other side is shaded. But even the curve of it had to do with the kind of centrifugal force. And I just thought, for me, that project was actually at the height of like everything, technology, climate, design. It's like every single aspect, and it was unashamedly urban, but it was really brilliant. So I logged in a little bit late, and I'm not sure if I missed that, but I just wanted to say I think that was for me like the height of really powerful technology and design to the nth degree, without being overpowering. So I just think that was such an incredible project.
Thank you. I had a picture of it at the beginning, because I was just mentioning that Nick used to say that was his most significant project, because it was the one where it really established Grimshaw as a fairly well-known practice, and was a springboard for lots of projects around the turn of the millennium. And it is a wonderful project. It was actually it was designed for the Eurostar, which is the high-speed train that goes to Paris. But then they moved the Eurostar terminal to St Pancras. So Waterloo Station was actually closed for a long time. but it was recently reopened, so it's now a main terminus station for kind of regional trains, and it's a wonderful, wonderful space. And we've obviously gone on to do lots of. We're very well known for our rail projects, and that's really, you know, one of the, like you say, it's one of the ones that's recognised as being one of the best.
Thank you. And perhaps Emma, you'd like to go?
So thanks, Andy. That was a really very interesting talk, a catch up on, you know, the work that's been done at Grimshaw's on Eden projects around the world. I really enjoyed that. I'm a huge fan of nature-inspired design, and you know, I did some research on that, so it's really interesting that that kind of philosophy is carrying on even through to the very challenging things that we face with, you know, climate change and all that. So I'm particularly interested in the challenges that you face with materials in the sense of, in sort of cost terms, and also the structural spans that you're dealing with, because I don't have an idea of what the spans are, but I'm just thinking about the British Museum, for example, which is a UK example of a grid shell roof with structural steel box members which are fully welded. I think they're all moment connections, and it's really just about what price do you pay for trying to achieve those spans in timber and also or in aluminium. You talked about aluminium, the sort of reduction in aluminium quantities and all of that. So it's really what price do we pay, or what price do you pay for the structural cost in achieving those large spans?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of analysis on this, and obviously for timber versus steel is a really interesting conversation, because there's a point at which if you're spanning so far, I suspect timber will become unviable. And you might want to start to break it down. In terms of the embodied carbon, which is, I think this is now for as long as I've been practicing, operational carbon has always been a very key consideration, making buildings very sustainable in their operation. But I think the conversation has shifted quite a lot, in particular in the UK, and with the release of the standard that I shared, the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, which does set targets for embodied carbon, and we're using that on Morecambe, for example. I think it will be really difficult to achieve so if you have a client who's committed to sustainability, we've done analysis that does a comparison of galvanized steel grid shell versus timber grid shell, and the timber comes out much better in terms of embodied carbon. Cost can vary in terms of that analysis. In this location, cost wasn't a big determining factor. It might be depending on where you are in the world. It was actually one of the things in China that I think ultimately meant that we weren't able to do a timber structure, because there isn't a big timber manufacturing base there. Like in Europe, it's completely different. We've got forests, you know, in Europe, in Scotland even. Whereas in China, there isn't that. So you would have to ship things from very far away to site. And so that whole transportation element, getting the materials to site, becomes a factor. I think going back to your starting point, which is, I think the way that we approach these things is, if you look to natural geometries as part of your starting point, natural geometries and structures are inherently efficient structures. So your starting point should be, how can I make this enclosure with the least amount of material? And whether or not that might be in steel, it might be in timber, but you'll tend to find that curved structures, and the British Museum is probably an example of this, are inherently allow you to do materially efficient spanning structures. And that's what we've tended to find. Like doing a flat grid shell is a terrible idea, because it's not as economic. So you can really drive down the member sizes by being very clever in terms of the geometries and optimizing it. And we work with the structural engineering company that I worked with, Schleit Bergermann. They specialize in this kind of form optimization. So certainly for something like Qingdao, we started with the kind of architect's version of the biome, and then they said, well, no, you need to kind of I remember there was a point where they were saying you need to inflate the geometry, because otherwise you don't get the efficiency of the grid shell structure. So it's a very, there's lots of analysis involved. It depends entirely where you are in the world and what materials you've got available. So there's no kind of simple answer to it, I don't think. But and we look at it on a case-by-case basis. On one of the Chinese projects that we looked at a cable net structure, which again is a very economic way to span a large. So you might look at a cable net like Frei Otto in Munich or something, if you're wanting to span a long way. There are different options available, I guess. But I guess what we try to do is look at what is needed, because the thing that the Eden projects share is this need to have transparency. And that obviously drives a certain approach to the enclosure, which is to minimize the amount of kind of structure in it, so you can get the most daylight in that you possibly can. But that might vary, of course, from typology to typology. If you need more opacity in the roof, it might be that you go for a different system.
Sure, thank you. Sorry, just on if you were trying to achieve it with a timber structure, would you have, how much discontinuity would you have between the members, the lengths of the members? Because, for example, the Mannheim roof, I think is made of continuous laths, isn't it? Yeah. So how long?
You're right. Traditionally, the traditional timber grid shells in England are actually formed on site, so that they come in flat, and then over the period of a number of weeks are formed into shape. They bend them. The downland grid shell it's in the southwest is an example. Cullinan's downland grid shell was constructed like this. If you look at something like Foster's grid shell in Canary Wharf, theirs is straight segments of timber with steel nodes that are all different. So the steel nodes do the connection point. On Morecambe, what we're doing at the moment is we're doing curved timber, but it's spliced. And then actually we've actually got a cable structure. The grid shells it's continuous, but it's made up of individual segments, right? And it's overlapped, so it's a double layer. And we've also got a cable structure on the inside which provides stabilization. So with that, because we've got square grid shell members, the diagonal bracing is formed by cables, which is obviously a very economic way to do it. So I suppose a grid shell, even timber grid shells, come in different kind of shapes and sizes and forms, and you can do them in different ways, I guess. One of the things that will be really interesting to look at is, because you've got that balance on if you go for straight timbers with steel nodes, it simplifies the timber elements, but it means that you've got these really, I think the nodes are probably quite high carbon because they need to be cast. So we've tried to kind of minimize the amount of steel connection points in ours as a kind of consideration around that embodied carbon. So does that answer your question? There's kind of different ways you can do it.
But thank you very much, Emma. Thanks for that. I've got a question here in the chat from Heather Dodd, and she's commenting, what's interesting is that the history of glass houses, and by extension is kind of by extension the history, I guess, of botany and plants and collection, is also a history of environmental colonialism in relation to the collection of plants and the kind of distance, I guess, between people and nature. So she's wondering to what extent the making of Eden projects in various places is an interesting counterpoint to that. So I think that's perhaps bringing that kind of not just social cultural, but also kind of the understanding of environmentalism not necessarily having a completely holistic history. Yeah.
I think what Eden Project stands for, which is connecting people to the natural world and connecting people to each other, and educate. Actually, they have this saying, which is education through stealth. You're not meant to go there and feel like you've been hit over the head with an environmental lesson, right? You're meant to go there and have a great time and come out with a kind of thing in your mind, which is perhaps not necessarily obvious, but to provide a bit of thought provoking. And actually, if that was a storyline for a destination, I think they would take that head on. If you were in a location where telling that story was really relevant, I think they would do that.
It might be, who knows what comes out of this lecture. I think that might be something that as we move forward, and for us, I guess here on the continent, it's a particularly live one because we have a kind of mixed relationship with AI, and that's my own question, because we, all the materials and the rare earth minerals that are used to kind of propel the AI revolution also are mined very extractively and a great destruction. So I feel like there is perhaps as the Eden Project moves into the next 25 years, there's a kind of another story that they probably need to begin to discuss.
Yeah, we actually did it. We did it. Jijo was actually themed on material extraction. It was telling the story of because it was in a mine. It was in a mine in China, and I thought that was a great storyline. You had this idea of kind of light spaces and dark spaces. The dark spaces were these kind of immersive spaces that brought those materials to life, but it was telling the story of extraction of materials to people, but in an engaging way. So like I said, no one wants to go to a visit destination and get a lecture on environmentalism. We want to communicate that story to people in an engaging way and to get them to think, but it also has to be a kind of fun place to go and visit, and that's where that's Eden's kind of speciality, right? It's like storytelling is so important. Engaging people through storytelling, and I think that's where they're particularly strong in that respect.
We've got I guess also related to that, we've got another question in the chat from Muso. From your experience, what has been the greatest challenge with working on a nature-inspired project in terms of climate and time? And looking back on the project's post-completion, are there any aspects you feel could perhaps have been explored further?
I think Qingdao was the biggest challenge for me from the point of view of approaching from a UK context where you kind of take for granted access to certain materials and building systems, and then finding out that that's not very common in the location that or there's a kind of procurement route. So I don't know whether this has changed more recently, but certainly at the time, like I said, things like natural materials and using timber were just basically not an option for us. Whereas now in the UK, this is very common to kind of, at least at the beginning of a project, say, well, it'd be great to use timber and then we explore it. And for whatever reason, like in a railway station, for example, there might be a fire restriction that means you can't do it. So that's been a bit, I suppose it's a challenge. And as well, like I said at the beginning, I think one of the most interesting things about working internationally is learning about all of these things. In each location that you go to, there's something interesting to discover in the way that things are done, and maybe there's an opportunity to establish a new way of thinking, at least. So it might be, like I said, with Eden Qingdao, like I said, with Eden Project in Cornwall, it's a project. So it opens on day one, and it might not have had all of the things that you had in your mind at the beginning, but it establishes a base, and then they might do another pavilion. And it might be possible now to say, well, hang on a minute, we could do this one in timber or bamboo or whatever it is. So that getting them kind of established is a really key move. And then kind of acknowledging the fact that they can grow and evolve and change, that's not the end, is kind of, I think, is an interesting thing for an architect, because I think we tend to think, right, we've done that design, we've finished it, and now let's move on. With Eden Project, it's not like that. It's like the building has a life, and we stay connected to that, which has meant we've stayed involved with Eden Project and with Cornwall for, like I said, for 25 years. So hopefully that happens on the other ones, and we'll continue to and be able to kind of bring in maybe some of the ideas that fell away because, for whatever reason, like you say, because of cost or time, it wasn't possible in that moment, but they can be brought forward later. There were two parts to that question. There was a second part.
I think you kind of answered both of them.
Yeah.
One, it was around climate and time, and then the second part was if there was something you were going to change later. But I think you kind of addressed both of those. Yeah.
They are, sorry, just very quickly, they are very technically complicated projects. So that, as an example, in Morecambe, the timber grade shell and the ETFE combination and doing a naturally ventilated space is actually very technically difficult. I didn't really talk about it in the talk because it's kind of, but we're doing lots of work in the background to, make sure that works. There's humidity, it's humidity and climate, and doing low energy buildings that are also low carbon and, fairly innovative systems. It's not easy, but that's where I suppose where we get our kicks, because it's kind of, that's why we go to work every day, because we want to, work on these really interesting, challenging projects.
Thanks. And I think, in some ways you're doing the Eden Project is providing a lab, I guess, to work out how we can do these things, which might not be possible on an individual project. But I guess because of Eden's commitment, it is possible architecturally to spend, 25 years with the same client trying to figure all these things out. I mean, also,
sorry, just very, very quickly, for me, the success, everyone probably knows this, but the client and the relationship is so important to the outcome of the projects. We're really lucky to have Eden Project as a client, and because they're, it's so important. Sustainability is so important to them. It's so important to us, and there's a commonality there. But without clients like that, we kind of, you can only, you can do your best to encourage your clients to take on board these sustainable principles, but at the end of the day, there's varying degrees. We've also got clients who perhaps aren't as interested in embodied carbon or things like this. So yeah, but it's certainly helpful working on these types of projects where I feel a lot more confident talking to other clients, because I've got clients who this is such familiar topic area. It then makes its way into all the other projects, and hopefully it starts to inform. You can start to educate your other clients, and they say, "Well, hang on, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that," which has happened. I've got clients that perhaps didn't even know what embodied carbon was at the beginning of the project, and we've explained it, and then they've become very kind of seriously committed to it. So I think you have to having those conversations early on is really important.
And I guess taking your clients on a journey.
Yeah.
So I think we'll take one last question before we wrap up, and I think it's from Mark. You've had your hand up for quite some time, so perhaps you'd like to ask your question if you're still there. Mark Harris.
Yeah, I've just unmuted if you can hear me.
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah. First of all, Andy, massive congratulations to you and to the practice. You've created some amazing places, all really pure, all clear, hugely resolved, and really joyous places. I think that's what came across from the session today. So that's quite rare over a lifetime, and a massive body of amazing work. So congratulations and thanks very much. It's been really inspiring. It's great to join up. I'm from RIBA Africa, which is we're forming very quickly. It's great to join up with GSA, and thanks to everyone who created this and for us to come together. As you said, I love it that the Eden Project lives and grows. That's what I really will take away from this. And I guess I was aware, but I hadn't really got that. So that's my takeaway from today. I love the global network as well. I think that's really, really powerful. And it's endless, and I hope it will continue. That aligns to our sort of mission and purpose for RIBA Global and RIBA International. I think, that's really exciting, and it's great to bring people together. That's very much what we're looking to do in the next few years. And I think the gap, the map that you put up, the gap in Africa is a real challenge for us as well, as Nenpin said at the beginning. So I hope coming from this session, we can help in a way and connect and join up and find a way to fill that gap. We have to keep going until it's done, I guess. We're never done until there's something there. What I'm interested in, I've been client side for the last 15 years. And again, I sort of see the value of clients being very clear and being very, you know, having the right brief in the beginning. That's so crucial. How do the projects actually grow? Maybe just give us a little bit of insight. Are they approached by groups around the world to say, look, come and look at a site and come and have our idea? Or they're actively sort of looking and putting business plans together to say, where's the next place? Just maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. There's a variety of ways, actually. So sometimes we get approached because we did the first Eden project. People identify that we're the architects and they say, right, we want one in, I think GJ might have been one that was like that, where there was a developer client who basically contacted us and said, I'm thinking about doing something similar. Other ones, and then I suppose Eden project identify opportunities themselves. An example of ones that I think Christchurch was one where there are certain locations where there are there's an opportunity. When Christchurch was hit with the earthquakes, there was this zone created called the red zone, and when they were then trying to figure out, well, what to do with that in the future, there was a plot of land that was assigned. Again, this was a bit similar to Qingdao, I guess, where an ecologically focused destination was identified as being an appropriate kind of use in that area, and Eden Project bid in that instance. There was companies actually bid to develop something on that site. So there isn't like a single route. I think with Morecambe, for example, the University of Lancaster, and I don't know, I mentioned it, I think, and a guy called Andrew Atherton, who was the head of the university, he just thought it would be a great thing to have one in the Northwest, and he contacted Eden Project. We then worked with them on the feasibility stage. So it kind of comes from individuals. Sometimes there's a sort of master plan being developed, and there's a land use that's associated, and Eden Project might come across that, or we might come across it, because we obviously kind of are actively involved in identifying opportunities with this. And it might be that we've also partnered with Eden Project on projects that aren't Eden projects, where they've been like advisors to us and things like this. So there's lots of different routes into it.
Okay,
does that answer the question? Yeah.
I hope you've got a few more agents out there now after this.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I think the Africa one is, like I said, I don't know why as far as I know, well, we haven't been involved in anything. I don't know whether Eden Project have looked at doing anything there, but it's a gap from my point of view. And actually, Grimshaw as a practice, we've not, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, we haven't got a building in Africa. We've bid on projects but haven't been successful. So yeah, hopefully we can fix that.
Well, yeah, that's a double challenge, definitely.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, Andy, for such an interesting presentation. I'm sure you'll see the comments in the chat later. We've had lots of positive comments about the presentation. And I think just really timely, as we're all trying to think about, regardless of what kind of architectural briefs we receive in practice, but how do we really think about how we respond ethically and in terms of the climate. So thank you so much for that. And thanks to Grimshaw for your work and for sharing that with us. Thank you to RIB Africa and to Nenpin for instigating this collaboration. And I also just want to thank our operational team at the GSA, Boyta Miller and so on, who put an enormous amount of work into setting up the digital platform so that we can all enjoy these kinds of lectures from all over the world. If you follow us on social media, you'll see what the upcoming talks are. Our next kind of big GSA talk will be the chronograms talk in June, so please follow us for that, and the follow-up RIBA Africa talks. If you would like to get CPD points, please don't forget to fill in the link in the chat. But once again, thank you to Andy, and thank you to everyone. We really, Andy, you might not know, but everyone's kind of stayed on for all the questions.
Yeah,
So,
I'm delighted, by the way. I wasn't expecting to go for the whole 2 hours, but I'm so happy that everyone enjoyed the presentation and with the questions afterwards. It's been really, really great.
So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you at the next one. And it's goodbye from me. I'm Jelan Fowl, and I'm the director at the GSA. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, everyone.